So it's recording now. Cool. Is there a clicker or? Okay. Okay. That's the wrong. That's not my talk. Okay. Okay, finally, we got the logistics out of the way. So hey everyone, my name is Adnan Abdul Hussain. I'm a software engineer here at Benami, and I mostly work on our container and Kubernetes offerings here. So I'm based in the San Francisco office primarily. More recently, I've been working out of the London office, my home, I mean, where I'm originally from, for a couple of months. And I spent the last 2 weeks here in sunny but slightly too hot Seville. So obviously I'm not a Spanish speaker, hence this talk is in English. If I'm talking too fast or speaking too low, please put your hand up, interrupt me, and ask me to repeat, or feel free to interrupt me. Okay, so I'm going to talk about building open source communities. So a quick agenda. I'm going to start off by talking about my experience a little bit in open source over the last 2 years at Benami. And then I'll kind of step back a little bit and talk more in general about how you can build an open source community and use kind of tools like GitHub and set up your repository so that you can engage developers in a much easier way. So about 2 years ago, at Benami, we open sourced our first set of Docker images, containers. So these are Docker files and scripts to get these things up and running. And we had about 8 or 9 repositories then, so there was quite a bit of stuff to manage. At that time, it was all completely manual, so there was quite a bit of work there. And since then, now we have 54 repositories. So that's 54 container repositories. We have other open source projects as well, but the Docker images, we have 54. And this is pulling from the main Bitnami library of VMs and cloud images and other stuff. So obviously that's a lot of repositories to manage, but thankfully a lot of that stuff is really well automated now, so there's not very much maintenance that happens in those repositories. The kind of stuff that we do is answer GitHub issues and support and that kind of stuff. So then about a year ago, we started looking into Kubernetes. And if you haven't heard of Kubernetes, it's basically a platform, like a production platform for running containers on top of. And what we wanted was to find an easy way, or to make it really easy for people to use our containers on top of Kubernetes. So around the same time, there was a project called Helm, which was added to the Kubernetes ecosystem. And Helm is a package manager for Kubernetes. So in Kubernetes, you write these YAML files to define how an application, the state of your application. And Helm basically packages all this up into a single tarball and makes it really easy to have repositories and pull from them, and kind of like an apt-get experience on top of Kubernetes. So that project was really early on. It just got added to the Kubernetes like GitHub organization. So we got involved pretty early on, and we started off by meeting regularly with the development team on that project, and kind of sharing feedback with them, getting to know what they're working on, giving ideas and where shortfalls that we found because we were using the product, the package manager quite often. And then that kind of led to, we met on site with them a couple of times, and they asked us to contribute the first linter. So if you don't know what a linter is, it's a a tool that runs through code and points out warnings about things that you can do to improve the code. So they asked us, as people who are developing these Kubernetes applications every day, and we had a lot of like best practices that we had defined for building these applications. So they asked us to come and contribute a linter. So that was our first core contribution to the project. And since then, we've two of the people from our team are core contributors to that project, and we're still pretty active in there. But from Helm core spun off two different projects that we started working on. The first is the Kubernetes charts project. So this is, I mentioned earlier that Helm gives you a kind of apt-get style interface on top of Kubernetes. The default set of things that you can install in your Kubernetes cluster comes from the Kubernetes charts project. So this is where we're trying to define a repository of things that exist that you can do, you can install with a single command, and we us, along with Google, were kind of the people to start this off and get this repository moving. The other thing that we also worked on was the Monocular project, which is like again, it's part of Helm. It's a dashboard, a user interface on top of Helm charts, so you can manage what's running inside your Kubernetes cluster. So Kubernetes is a big project. So and you'll find that in these kind of projects you have special interest groups for particular areas. So for example, in Kubernetes there's a special interest group that deals with storage and like how storage is managed in Kubernetes clusters. The ones that we're kind of involved in with Bitnami is special interest groups apps, which is all about deploying and managing applications and operating them on top of Kubernetes. And about a month ago, I got invited to help out as a co-lead for the SIG apps group. So that means that with my experience of building applications on top of Kubernetes, we can provide that influence to help move the goals of that SIG forward. So now I want to step back a little bit and talk more in general. I want to explain what is important, why is it important to build an open source community. So if you think about any open source project that you use on a daily basis, it's pretty likely that that open source project has a large community of contributors, and probably has like very regular releases, and that's probably why you're using it. So I don't know, does anyone have an example of something that they use daily? An open source project? Docker. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So Docker is a great example where there's a bunch of like daily contributions to that project. It's very active. There's also a large set of communities that are behind it and putting resources into that project. And this is important because you wouldn't be using Docker if if it didn't have that level of support. If it was a project that was like a weekend project and it could be the best code in the world. It could be doing like the most amazing thing, but without a community around it, no one's going to use it. It's dead. So that's really vital to the success of any project. And in many ways, it's similar to starting a company, right? And selling a product. For that company to be successful, it needs to be able to have users that actually use the product and provide feedback and allow you to develop that project further. So let's look at some of the reasons why people like to participate and contribute in a community. So number one is recognition. This is kind of obvious when you submit a patch. How many people have submitted patches to an open source project before? Awesome. So you guys have submitted patches. That when that gets merged, you're in the history of that project, right? Your GitHub name in Git, you have your name and you have the email, and that's there, and everyone can see it. You're going to get that recognition, and hopefully, if you contribute more, you gain more and more recognition with the maintainers of that project. So another reason is influence, and I kind of touched on this with what we were doing with Helm. So again, one of the reasons we started contributing to Helm is because it fit our needs, and we wanted to help drive it in the right course, and make sure that it kept it allowed us to develop the best charts possible. So we were able to get involved in that project and provide the feedback that they needed and help them to get to that to get to a good direction. So open source is a lot about the people, especially communities. So building relationships with people is very important, and the more and more you contribute to these projects and get involved, you're gonna build these relationships with people. So that's another important reason people participate. Another one that's important for companies and also individuals who are maybe doing consulting or freelancing is getting that leadership and mind share. If it's in a space that is particularly of interest to you or your company's business, just showing that you're contributing to a project or you're leading a project is great leadership and mind share, and really builds that trust of the products that you actually want to sell. And then finally, things like skills development and personal fulfillment. I think these are things that individuals like to have. You may want to contribute to a project because you want to learn a new language, or you want to learn about distributed systems or things like that. And personal fulfillment, if you're using an open source project day to day and you find a bug or some documentation that isn't correct, you might feel compelled to go and change that because a lot of work has gone into building that project to you using it, so it makes sense to give back. So with that, what are the keys to a kind of effective, to having an effective community? So I think it's really important to put people before code. If you start turning away people that want to contribute, that's going to really affect your project. Those people may have a really bad experience and start blogging and telling people that your project is bad and they've had a bad experience. And that's not good because that's going to affect other contributors that are trying to contribute to your project. So everyone should have the right to contribute, and you should try to get people in and keep them in and keep them happy. So that's pretty important. Having a code of conduct is a great way to make sure that people are happy and respected within that community. So if you have an open source project, add a code of conduct, teach the community to be honest, respectful, open to feedback, that kind of thing. If you're contributing to a project that doesn't have a code of conduct, it doesn't matter. You can still abide by a personal code of conduct so that you are comfortable within that community. And then meritocracy, I'll touch on in the next slide a bit more, but it's basically the idea that the people kind of in charge and leading the project are chosen based on their contributions to it. So the more and more you contribute, the more trust and kind of influence you get into that project. And this is something that all contributors can trust and respect. If you have a project that's kind of run by dictators and it's not great, it's not something that you'd feel like you'd want to contribute to. And in communication is really important. Just like in a company that's very distributed, open source is even more distributed. Like it's open for anyone to go and contribute. So it's really important to have processes in place and defined so that people know how to get involved and get in touch with maintainers, or have forums to discuss issues in the project. So again, I'm going to touch on meritocracy. There's a really good article that I've linked in the slides here, which I'll share in the Meetup later. So this is these are the guys at Red Hat. They have a really interesting decision framework, which they base all of their open source projects on. And they define meritocracy as this. So the best ideas should come from anywhere, and the best ideas should always win. So it's always based on the actual idea and not who that person is. And yeah, contribution matters more than title. What you're actually contributing is more important than whether you're a CEO or a CTO or VP or just an engineer that doesn't matter. It's all about what you're actually contributing to the project. So I really like this this quote from John O'Bacon, the author of Art of Community. He says it comes down to just being a part of something. So feeling that you're a part of something, and that's really how you'd want to feel if you were contributing to an open source project. And if you're building your own community, this is how you want the users in your community to feel as well. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go through some of the tools that you can use to engage a community. So I'll be touching on the kind of things that you'd use to describe how contributions to your project work, and also keeping in sync with communication and evangelism. But before we go into that, I'm just going to talk about the different types of participation. So again, I mentioned this before, like the kind of code types of participation are bug fixes and documentation. So you're using a project, you find a bug in it, you go to the source and you fix it, you submit a pull request upstream. Same with documentation, you're following through something and something isn't quite, or you had to do something different than what is documented, and the documentation can be updated. You can go and update the documentation and submit a pull request for that. But it doesn't have to be in the project itself. It can be a tool around the project. If it's a big organization like Kubernetes, for example, you'll see that most of the contribution happens outside of the Kubernetes core, right? There's a bunch of different projects like Helm, like Charts, Minikube, and all these other awesome tools that build out this ecosystem. And those tools don't necessarily have to be open source themselves. They could be products from companies that are using the open source project under the hood. So creating tools is also a great way to participate and join in a community and also bolster that community. But it doesn't have to be code at all. You can get involved in design discussions and planning meetings. And this is another reason why communication is important it's important to have a process around that, so you can enable people to get involved this way. Special interest groups are another good way if it's a large enough project to split up the focuses of it, the areas of focus. And also evangelism. If you're doing something cool with a project that you want to share with other people and get more people to see what you're doing, it's a great. You can go out there, create a blog post, go to a meetup like this, or talk to people, go to conferences, and just talk about what you're doing and the project. So this is an important point. If you're maintaining an open source project, you really need to make it clear how people can contribute to it. Because if I go to a repository that has like a very small README with very little information and no contributing guide or anything like that, I'm not going to know how to contribute to the repository. I'm not going to even know if the maintainers actually want me to contribute. Like, are they going to accept my pull request if I get it in? There's no process outlined for it. So it's really important to put this into place. So I'm going to use some examples from Kubernetes again, where I think Kubernetes in general does a very good job of defining what how projects should advertise themselves. So this is an example of the service catalog in the Kubernetes project, and you can see it's a lot of text, but basically the first paragraph just states what the problem is and what the problem this project is trying to solve. So what is it actually trying to do? In a very succinct way, one paragraph. And then the rest of this is defining a use case. So it's very clear. Okay, so the service catalog is, the use case is a user wants to consume a database in their application and browse a list of available services from a catalog. So that's a use case that it's going to describe. The README goes on to have a lot of other useful stuff like video links and links to a demo so you can see how that stuff works. That's all good stuff to put in the README. Another important thing is contributing guidelines. So I've stolen this from the Kubernetes Charts project because this is something I'm familiar with. But we have the first thing here we define is that we have a contributor license agreement, which basically because the project is part of the CNCF organization, all contributions need to sign this agreement to ensure that you have the right to contribute that. So we kind of explain that. The other thing we explain here is that if it's a bug in Helm, it doesn't belong in this repository. So this is good because we can reduce noise in the repository and point people to where the right direction is to file a particular issue. And then we go on and explain how to contribute a chart. So this is basically, sign the CLA, fork the repository, do some other stuff based on the repository. We also note down here what the technical requirements and the documentation guidelines that we expect from pull requests here. That way we don't have to, every time someone opens a pull request or opens an issue, we don't have to explain to them, oh, we usually do it this way, this way, this way. We can just say, we can just hope that people will read this beforehand. And actually GitHub, if you have this file in the root of your repository at contributing.md, GitHub will add a link to that from the create new issue or create new pull request page. So it's a nice way of adding an alert there to point people to read this information before submitting something. So having these requirements here saves maintainers a lot of time. Okay, I'm being told to speak louder, so I'll try and speak louder. So having these requirements here helps maintainers from having to ask these questions all the time. The other thing you can do in your contributing guide is talk about how issues are triaged and the kind of labels that you can use. So here I put an example of the Helm repo where we add labels for questions and proposals and features, and we explain how how those are triaged and reviewed by maintainers. The same with pull requests on the Kubernetes charts repo, we have these labels. It gets really frustrating and I've witnessed this on the other side, where people have been frustrated at me for not knowing where a pull request is in the review process. So keeping people up to date by adding labels or adding comments and making sure that they know that you're on top of it is also really important. Having a roadmap is really useful, just to show people when they can, just to keep the community informed on when the next version is, when they can expect particular changes, and just keep in sync with all of that. So going back to communication, most open source projects will have an IRC channel, or Slack is the hot new thing. So Kubernetes has a Slack channel, for example. This is a great place for providing support and just having all the maintainers and contributors hang out in one place where they can discuss things, and things that might be more difficult to discuss in an issue can be discussed in chat. One thing I have seen is we did this in Helm, having a stand-up. So in the same way you have a Scrum stand-up at a company, just having a stand-up, like one line of this is what I did yesterday, this is what I plan to do today, just to keep the community informed about what the progress is for that project. Having a weekly public call is also really useful, and again for discussion and stand-up, but also just to connect. Again, it's distributed. You're working with people from all different walks of life, and getting on a call and meeting these people is a really great way of connecting and getting to know people. And also demos. Again, if you're going back to evangelizing, if you're using something that you're if you're doing something interesting with a particular project, go and demo it in a public call. And again, evangelizing. Go to conferences, meetups, and actually talk about your project and ask people, is it solving the problem that we expect it to solve? And another thing I've learned from maintaining the Kubernetes charts repo is that automation is really important. That's something that's going to make it a lot easier for maintainers to review PRs and also get them in faster. And David and Angel are going to do a great job explaining how CI and CD works in the open source world next. So that's all I have. Muchas gracias. We have small time for questions. A short amount of time for questions. Okay, no questions. So then the next talk. We're on time again.